Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to week 8 of cybersecurity management. How are you guys doing? Are we back to 100% after the break yet? It's great. Okay, so we can start with a little, maybe 5 minutes for Q&A. If you guys have any questions regarding the assignments or anything related to the unit, you want to ask now. I mean, I can't promise I can provide you with the answer, but if I know it, then I can help you with our question. Yes, Alfie.
Hi.
Hi.
It's actually the question's already been asked in the general for this class, I think,
Mm-hmm.
by Karen, just
Okay.
regarding the slide deck and the worksheet.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could shed some light on that, if you're able to see it.
Could you summarize the question for me, please?
Yeah, it's just the only real mention of the slide deck is there's one very brief mention of it in the
Mm.
entire
Yeah.
assignment
Yeah.
document, and it's
Yeah.
not mentioned in the deliverable.
Okay. So
Um,
the slides, the way I understand it, if it was the previous run of the unit, was that the slide was there for the presentation. So
okay,
when you present, you have to use the slides, right? So the slide is just part
yeah,
of it, and you submit it together with the um, report, and I believe the slides will be graded as part of the presentation. I think the presentation will have some criteria about how well organized the slides are.
okay.
Yeah.
So that leads on to another question then, because the deliverable is, it says quite clearly in the assignment document that we're to submit just one document.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously each group member will submit that same document
Yeah.
each,
Um.
but with
uh,
one document with a report,
yeah.
how would we add the slide deck into that
You
uh,
can just attach the slide deck to it
in the
at the end of
appendix?
the report. Yeah, or you can zip them
Okay,
into one file. That's fine. I think it's no strict requirement. We will not penalize you if you upload like 2 files.
okay,
Yeah,
sure, thank you.
and the single submission is that because it's a group submission, so there's only one submission. I think one person can submit on behalf of the whole group. Okay. So there's another question. When is the result for A2? I think for this question, and I would defer it to Jamal. I think he had all the thing related to the assignment, but I think he noticed somewhere about like the timeline. So there'll be like 3 weeks of working days after the submission. So I think we will stick with that timeline. Any other question, please? I believe last week there was some issues with the groups. I think some member of the group got kicked out of the original group and moved to a different group. Um, have you guys sorted that out yet with the unit chair? Have you checked the group and all in order, I hope? Yeah, that's good. Yep. Just a little glitch in the system. I hope you understand. Any other questions, guys? Great. Okay, so if no more question, then we can get started with the content of this week. And this is week 9. So we have one more teaching content left. And then week 11 is when the assignment 3 is due. So we're almost near to the end here. And there's a quick reminder of what we learned last week. Last week we learned about security management models, right? There are some framework that we talk about, and I think the most important ones of them are the NIST framework and the ISO 27000 framework. And there's Australian Essential 8 as well. And you might wonder, so you have learned about the security models, right? Which basically is a very comprehensive guides of the step of the thing that you need to do to implement those security programs. Um, so this week title is Security Management Practice. Just from reading the title here, just compare model with practice. What do you think the main differences are? Why do we still need to learn about security management practice, given the fact that we already learn about like the very systematic models which are out there? So what is security management practice in the opinion, and why do you think that we need to learn it in addition to what we learned last week? I think we have discussed these terminologies, like I think not in a official capacity in the past few weeks, but some of you seem to have the good idea of what's the difference between a practice and a model. So what do you think security management practice are? We talk about standards, we talk about framework, we talk about models, blueprints last time, right? Then what is practice? What do you think it means? Anyone has used these terms in the line of work? Okay, that's great. If no one knows what it is, and the content of this week will be very useful to you. Okay, so let's start. Yeah, let me make it full screen. Okay, so this week is about security management practices, and the objective of this week is that after this week, you would be able to recommend an information security management practice and explain how it is useful to the organization. And you can, of course, to do that, you need to be able to list the key elements of a practice and describe how to measure whether or to measure and evaluate the practice in terms of um, conducting security measurements. Yeah. And that is related to the last three learning outcome here. First, you need to describe the key component of a security matrix and identify a proper implementation plan and understand um, the role of information security in various areas of the company. Okay, so let's get right to it. Okay, so take a step back. Um, as a business, we want the best for the money. Okay, so we want the best value for money. So anything we implement, we need to somehow evaluate the cost and the benefit, right? So this process is referred to as a value proposition. So cybersecurity is no exception. Okay, um, the only I think the only reason why it is deployed in a company is that it brings some values. So what is this value? What is the value proposition for a cybersecurity program? Yeah, and in order to evaluate this, to put a number into this value proposition, we need to say some process behind it, right? And to achieve a certain value proposition, then it makes sense to follow some best practice. Okay, you could adopt a systematic way that we talked about last week. Like we start with some model, very well-known cybersecurity model or framework, and then you customize it to the companies, right? You go through all the risk assessment or through the adaptation process that we did from our workshop last week. So those are a very systematic way to develop a cybersecurity program. Having said that, you can only afford to adopt such a systematic way if you have a lot of resources, right? In practice, for small companies and the company that whose priority is somewhere else, so you don't have enough resource to take such a systematic approach. So the one of the best way that you can do instead of doing of like following all the step is to just follow some best practice. Okay, so practices, security management practices are real example of thing that is actually being done in real companies, and you can use those practice and implement them as is in the organization because they are real and working example, right? They are not. The main difference between the practice and the model is that the model is a little bit theoretical. It's a little bit abstract, right? And it's the reason for it to be abstract and theoretical is that it try to be as general as possible. But practices are real thing that is implemented in real companies, so they are very concrete instances of those model. So you could, for example, one good way to implement our program is to look around you at the competitors, the company that is similar, have similar profile to our company, and see what they are doing, what practices that they are employ, and then we can just take that as a guidance and customize a little bit for some companies. Okay, so that is the main difference between a practice, a security management practice, and security management model. I think it's we will get a more like detailed sense of this different as we go along. Okay, so what is security management practice? So this is also a process. Okay, you cannot just out of the blue and go and ask the competitors for say manual of um, cybersecurity management and adopt and implement it straight away in our company. There's a process and there's some principle that you need to follow. So security management practice is concerned, its main goal, its main purpose is to define the process by which you can measure the quality of a security program and demonstrate its effectiveness. Okay, so there are two keywords here. The first is measuring, and the second is demonstrate its effectiveness. Okay, they are quite different. The first one is concerned with getting the data, right? Understand what data you are collecting and implement the process of getting that data. And the second goal, which is demonstrate its effectiveness, is about interpreting the data, right? The data by itself is meaningless. You need to be able to interpret it, right? To give some meaning into this raw data that you collected. So the mass amount of data that you collected. And that is the goal of the second aspect, which is to demonstrate whether this security program that you are measuring is doing its job or not, is effective in meeting the cybersecurity goal or not, right? So this is a basic story that you hear in the current data-driven world that we are living in, right? So the data is everywhere, but to make use of this data, you need some human insights, right? To extract the insight from those data. But those are two different processes. They are equally important. You cannot get the insight if you don't have the data to start with. And once you have the data, you need a clever way to attribute meaning, to extract the meaning from those data. Okay, does it make sense to everyone? So if you look at this, it is like a instance of data science problem, right? And it's not just any kind of data science domain, but this is like you doing data science in the domain of security. You're collecting the data and you analyze the data to see how effective the current program is doing. All right. So at the core of it, this is a data science problem. Anyone has a comments or anything you want to add in to this? Yeah. So you might not have these things like implemented explicitly in the organization, but it's somewhere, right? To have a proper program, you need to be able to evaluate how well the program is doing. And this is a part of this practice, okay? To evaluate anything, and especially to demonstrate whether to quantify the value proposition of the program, you need a way to measure it, right? And you need a way to interpret the data to show the value. Okay, so that is a high level idea behind security management practice. And when you look at it closely, this turn into two questions that you need to ask. That is that you need to answer, right? So the first question is the security service provided by the system adequate for meeting the security requirement? And the second part is, has the security service been implemented properly so that one can rely on them? I want you to take a moment here and look at these two questions. And do you think what the main difference are? Are they the same? Are they the same question? If not, what do you think the main difference between these two questions? The first one is whether the security service is adequate for meeting the requirement, and the second question is whether this service has been implemented properly so that we can rely on them. Do you think they are the same question? Most likely not, right? But I'm very interested to hear from you. What do you think the difference between these two questions are? I mean, for example, if you answer yes to the first one, does this always imply that you answer yes to the second one, and vice versa? If like they always have the same answer, then they are the same, right? But if they are different, then if the answer is yes for one question, it could be no for the other question. Anyone? Anyone has a comment on this? Looking at these two questions, do you think they are the same? If you were to, if you were tasked with answering these two questions, right? I mean, would you do different thing? Would you do different kind of research and measurement to answer them, or you can use the same set of measurements, same set of like research methodology to answer these questions? Any volunteer? Okay, all right. So I think maybe this question is worth spending a bit more time on. So I would not wait for the answer here, but I think the high level idea is that they are very different, right? But I let it to you to mull over the subtlety between these two questions. Okay. Right. So in order to implement security management practice, you need some methods, right? And you need some resource to implement it. Okay. So now we will spend a bit more time on looking at the ways and the resources that you need for implementing security management best practice. So the first concept that we will touch is security benchmarking. You might have heard of this word benchmarking a lot. When if you're working in AI, for example, or data science, for example, then you might heard of words benchmarking as a way to comparing what you're doing with some state of the art, right? And security benchmarking is no different. It is about how you security practice compare to a peer group of similar companies, right? So basically what you do when you do benchmarking is that you do your own mm, measurement, and you take the measurement that is published by different companies, a similar company as your company, and you compare them. Okay, and ideally you want to beat what is the other company is reporting, right? So this is security benchmarking. But sometimes the goal of security benchmarking is not about uh, demonstrating that you are superior, but it's also about finding out like how bad the security posture is, and then you can address the problem. Okay. Yep. So the main idea behind security benchmarking is about comparing with competitors, right? And it doesn't define what competitors here are, but benchmarking is about the process of comparing only. And there are three types of benchmarking. The first is internal and external benchmarking, where we will go to it a little bit later. But internal benchmarking is about comparing with their own standards, right? As a company, you set their own standards, and then benchmarking is about comparing how well you're doing with their own standard. And external benchmarking is a bit more popular meanings of the word benchmarking, where you get the measurement, you get the data from different companies, and you compare their own data against them. Okay, and it can be process benchmarking. So in this type of benchmarking is process. It focuses specifically in the process, okay, security process that you employ, whether that process is like making sense or not, or whether that process is full of vulnerabilities. Okay, so in process benchmarking, you would compare it with some standards process published somewhere, and you do your own measurement and see what is missing. Okay, and the last one is performance benchmarking, where performance here can mean many things, but in this context, the performance means security performance, right? And there's a many different way to decide what is constitute as security performance, right? It's really depend on the application and on the domains and on the focus. Okay, so there are a few big categories of benchmark that we will go through in a bit. First one is standard of due care and due diligence. So this is a way that you benchmark against some standards and best practice. So best practice in the industry, and there's something called gold standard as well. Okay. So security benchmarking assume that you have access to a fairly broad set of consistent quantitative and qualitative data set, right? Because this data set come from outside if you were to do external benchmarking. And um, when you use that data set for comparison, you have to assume that that data set is correct, right? Because if you are benchmarking against some data this is fake, which is not correct, then the whole process does not make sense. Okay, so there are a few keywords here. The first is consistent data set. Okay, what do you mean? I mean, looking at this, what do you think the word consistent data set here means? What does it mean by inconsistent data set when it comes to benchmarking? What does the word consistent in this sentence means to you? Anyone? Ah, okay. Can I take 1 minute, please? I just need to open the door for someone. Okay, I will be right back in 1 minute. Okay. Yeah. So, thanks for your patience. Back. And anyone have any thought on this word consistent in this sentence? So when you do benchmarking in data science, for example, you need a consistent data set to compare with. So what do you think the word consistent means? The other keyword in the sentence is qualitative and quantitative. Is quite, I think we have a vague idea what they means, right? But why do we need the data set to be consistent?
Because if it's not consistent, then it's not reliable. Like if it's we would have to every time we test, it would be different results.
Every time you test the data set, you have a different result. Is that the problem with the data set or the problem with our test? Because the data set is what you are given with, right? But from what you're saying, that if you run the same thing on the same data set and you have a different result, it seems to be a problem with our with the thing that you are running. Is that right? Does it make sense to you? So consistent in the sense consistent of the computation. But in this sentence, it's required the data set to be consistent.
Does it mean like consistency between the quantitative and the qualitative data set?
Yeah, I think in a way, yes. I mean, if you assume that one data set consists of both quantitative part and qualitative part, then yes, then that, yeah, in that sense, it makes sense. But for example, if you have one qualitative, no, quantitative data set, then what does this mean when you say that this data set is consistent? Okay, so one comment from Chris say that with the consistency of the data sets mean that each data set measures the same stuff. Here, I think you can ascribe that meaning when you consider there are multiple data sets that you're comparing with and they are measuring the same thing. Of course, they have to measure the same thing, right? As the one that you are measuring for you to be able to compare. Yeah, so this is a good meaning. This is a good definition of the word consistency as well. And just remind, I think, yeah, just to rephrase another comment on consistency is that the consistency between the quantitative and qualitative data set. Okay, so it means they cannot be contradictory, right? They must like represent the same thing. So that definition of consistency is between two data sets. But even in the same data set, we say the data set is consistent. Yeah, I think Andre is here. To say what I was about to say as well. He said that this means that the data sets have been collected in a consistent way. Yeah, so this is about like the quality of the data, right? So the data cannot be random. So consistent in this sense means that data is collected in a consistent way. Right? I mean, if the instrument's broke or if this data is just made up by someone, then it's not very meaningful, right? So consistent here is in the internal consistency of the data set. It must represent the true. I mean, it must represent what is called the true working of what it must represent the true values of what it is measuring, right? So that's what consistency means in this case. But you don't need to worry too much about this word. I think from this sentence, all we need to take away that the data is of good quality. Yeah. Because remember, benchmarking is a way something to do with the data. If the data is not good, then the result is not meaningful, right? So garbage in and garbage out. So you need the input to be good, and in that sense, you can define consistency as being a good data set as well. Okay. So there are two types of data. Qualitative data is about quality, things that you can actually measure. And quantitative is things that you can measure. You can put a number to it. So can anyone give an example of what qualitative data, what type of qualitative data that you may collect when in the field of cybersecurity? Think that I think you already done it. So does anyone remember what type of qualitative data that you might need for cybersecurity, and where did they come from?
Well, this will be probably what qualifies the record. So a label, and could be clicked by the knowledge that attack has been happened or not.
So this one is yeah, I think the data is very vague. Can you specify what type of data it is?
Well, let's
And
say
it's
if you
qualitative,
have,
yeah.
If you have logs, for example, and somehow you know that this record represents attempt of attack, that will be your qualitative data, basically saying that if you can use machine learning now to predict what is the common between those records, and then therefore it should predict that attack is happening.
Yep. Okay. Yep. I would buy that. Yep. I think qualitative data here mean that is something that is not described by numbers but described by text. Is that right?
Yes.
But
a label basically.
But in that way, I think you can still map it to quantitative because the label is not free text. The label come from a well-defined set, right? So for example, if I define this label as malware, then I can map it to 0 or 1, right? So qualitative data from this means
I have a call, have to answer.
Okay. All right. So anyone else have an example of what qualitative data that we may collect in cybersecurity? So qualitative data means free text, something free text, right? Related to free text. And you have definitely come across this in the past few weeks. And many of you have done this for assignment 2 as well, I remember. So what the question is, what type of qualitative data that you may collect in cybersecurity management? Information that can actually be measured.
Maybe like employee perception and awareness, like from surveys.
Yeah, that is what exactly what I'm hinting at. Yeah, thank you, Darby. Yeah, so do you recall when you do evaluation of SETA program, right? So you have somehow to evaluate whether that program is helpful or not. And one way that you get that data is by interviewing with the user, by doing surveys where the user evaluate the cost, right? And all of those quality are qualitative. All this data is qualitative, and it's something you cannot put in numbers on, right? So you ask people to describe what they think about the program, how effective they are about the program, and uh, and how they think their awareness about cybersecurity has changed. So these things are considered as qualitative data. That's good. That's a very good example of what we are collecting. And quantitative data is information about quantities. What that is information that can be measured and written down with numbers. So I think even in assignment 2, there are, some of you mentioned about this type of data that you are collecting as well. So can anyone give an example of the quantitative data that you may be collecting if you are running a cybersecurity program for the company? Pass rate for employee training. Yeah, so that is one example. Yeah, but there's plenty of other area outside of SETA of education and awareness training that you can think of.
Incident like metrics.
Incidents. Can you say that again? Incident what?
Incident metrics, like how many incidents has happened, like how many phishing emails were avoided, how many were clicked on.
Okay. So incident will be there's a count, right? The count of the numbers of the incident that the company have encountered. Yes. So yeah. So that is another good example of something that can be represented by number, and it's very easy to interpret, right? The higher the number, the worse that you are in. Okay, so quantitative data is sometimes easier to collect and easier to interpret than qualitative data. Okay, so when you do benchmarking, not only that you need to concern yourself about the type of the data and the quality of the data, but also whether the data is relevant or not, right? Whether you are not comparing apple against oranges, it means that the data set must come from the organization of the same profile as your organization. And that is easier said than done. And I think we will discuss some of the reason behind the challenges for this second point later. So let's move on. Let's talk about standards, right? Besides benchmark, okay, so one category of benchmark is standards of due care and due diligence. So what are they? Remember, we talk about due care and due diligence in week 2. And of course, I'm not expecting to remember what they are, but maybe a quick recap here would help. So due diligence is about like sticking with the process, you're implementing the process properly, right? And due care goes a little bit beyond that, right? So even if things are not specified in the process, but if you know that is the right thing to do, then you would do it. You would spend a little bit more effort to do the right thing. Okay, and I think in week 2 we discussed some example in the workshop about not reporting the vulnerabilities versus the process of finding the vulnerability, right? So just distinguish the difference between due care and due diligence. And here we're coming back to it again, right? So one way to benchmark to measure how how well the cybersecurity program is doing is to compare it against the standard of due care in the industry. So the process of this involve first, the company must adopt a minimum level of security for legal defense, and then you need to show that you have done what any prudent organization would do in similar circumstances. Okay, so what you would do is quite important here, because I mean there might not be any company would do the same thing, but if you but for most people, if they think this is the right thing to do, then you will still need to do it, even if there's no other company doing the same thing. Okay, because you need to compare yourself against a prudent organization, not just an organization that exists, right, but a prudent one. Okay, so it could be an ideal organization that you are measuring yourself against. So this is standard of due care. Okay, so standard of due diligence is that it's quite straightforward in the sense that you need to implement the control at the minimum standard and maintaining them, and you need to show the evidence of you doing these standards and maintaining these standards. And I think we discussed this in week 2 again, is that how the failure of standard of due care or due diligence can harm the organization. Not only does it expose the organization to legal liability, but it will cause a loss of reputation as well, because if the customer has a sense that the company is not exercising due care, then it follows that the company would not care much about the customers, right? And in that sense, the company would have very low reputation. Okay, best practice. Another way to benchmark is to compare what you're doing against a set of best practices is adopted by other people in the industry. And for that, you need to get the hands on some security best practice guidelines, right? And we just learned from last week that in Australia, frameworks such as SIT284 is very relevant here. So you can go there and get the guidelines on the best practice and try to implement as much as you can on them. Okay. So there are a few interesting notes here. Is that company with the best practice may not be the best in every area, because the best practice may cover the areas which is not the priority of the company, right? So you can still claim that you're adopting the best practice even though you have only focused on a few area. Okay, and normally you may only need to establish an extremely high quality or successful effort in one particular area in order to be able to claim that you follow the best practice, right? The best practice here is okay. So sorry for the interruption. I'll just continue here. Yeah, so the point here is again that only establish extremely high quality in one area. You don't have to cover all the area. That is relevant. Right. Anyone got any question here? Okay. Right. So Visa is a good example, and if you work in the payment industry, there's a standard called PCI DSS that give you a very long list of requirements on what you need to implement in order to be certified as following that best practice. Right? Okay, so Visas have an example here, and it has developed 2 important documents that can improve and regulate its information systems. The first one is called the assessment process, which contain a series of this is only a recommendations, right? It's not a strict requirements, but if you follow them, then you have a good chance of being eventually being integrated into the Visa system. right? So this second one is agree upon procedure. Procedure. This one is strict. So this one defines the API that our system had to work with the visa system. So this one is very technical, and it's not only contains the interface, but it's also the policy that you need to implement as well. And this agree upon procedure is used to safeguard security systems that carry sensitive information, because Visa and the other system that it interfacing with contain like carry out the transaction, right? The money. So it's very important that they have to follow the same standard. Yeah. Anyone have a question or comments or any of the best practice that you may have to implement in the line of work? No? Okay, good. Okay, so the gold standard. The gold standard is like the best standard that you might want to aim for. All right, so it's a good example here. Is Apple Store app submission. I see. So yeah, that is a good example. Can you elaborate a bit more on that, on what is required for the submission here? Except that you have to package it in the right way, right? But does they specify any requirement in terms of security, and how do they check that? Yep. Okay, so maybe we just move on a little bit. Why is this? Okay, we see it here. It's a long list. Basically, we want to know how the data is managed. I see. Has anyone here have experience submitting an app to Apple Store? And you can enlighten us more with the detail of the process on what we need to do to get our app submitted. I would have thought they have specific API. You need to call in order to store the data, to store any kind of data, and that API is managed by Apple. Yeah, I think this is a good example. I think we can catch up again in our workshop, Mike. All right, so gold standards is another way to figure out how good the security program is, but the word implied that this is very high standard, right? So this consider the model level of performance that prove industrial leadership, quality, and concern for the protection of security. And the implementation will requires a great deal of financial and personnel support. So have you heard of any, are you guys familiar with any company that implement this gold standard? I can imagine the big company that all of us relying on, they would have the resources and personnel both financial and personnel resources to implement this, right? But this gold standard, I don't think is easily available to the public. Okay. So choosing which recommended practice to adopt is not as easy as it sounds, because you have to consider various factors. The first one is, does organization have the same profiles? Okay, resemble the target organization of the best practice. So if you want to borrow the best practice of a company, you have to see whether that company has the same profile or not. Are you in a similar industry as the target? Okay, so this is a sanity check here. So you should not adopt a practice from a company which is a different domain, right? The next one is, do you face similar challenges? Again, another sanity check. And is organization structure similar to the target? It's very important, because even if the company and the target is doing similar thing, but if the other company is 10 times bigger, then their practice will be very different to yours. The next important factor to consider is that whether you have the same resources, right? There's no point of adopting the gold standard if you don't have the money and personnel to carry out that task. Yeah. Anything else that may have been missing from this list that you think of? So you have the size, you have the domain, right? You have the challenges, and you have the resources. Is there anything missing from here? Okay. I think this is pretty comprehensive. There's a lot to consider already, right? It's a lot to sort of like curb our enthusiasm. Maybe that's the right word. Here's some benefit of security benchmarking. I think this is this makes sense. So I will not go through them. So basically, benchmarking is a good way. I mean, the only way for you to improve is to compare against the competitors, right? You don't want to fall far behind. So benchmarking is a way to let you do that. Yep. And here's a problem. Here's a catch. Early on, I think we discussed some requirement for doing benchmarking is that you first need to get the hand on this broad set of consistent and quality data sets, right? But getting that data set is not simple, because one of the reasons is that organizations don't want to share. I mean, they can share customer data set, they can sell those data set for sure. But when it comes to securities, I think the stake is a little bit different. Because, I mean, if you reveal to people that you have been subject to attack, right? So, some sort of like saying that the program is pretty bad, right? And most importantly, one of the reasons why the company don't want to share is that many of this data they have would reveal the internal structure of the company, right? And like how many servers they have, what sort of firewall they're deploying, and how the personnel department structure. And those information are very important, right? And in a practical world, they don't want to share that, because this translates to business competitive. It's a business advantage. You don't want the competitor to know how you structure the company. And any comments here? Any comments here? Do you think it makes sense, or do you still think that companies should still share this information to each other? And related to this, you can think about the regulation, like all the regulation in place, or the law and regulation in place. Do you think that there's any law that forces the company to share this information? We have learned about notifiable data breach, right? And all of this requirement when it comes to privacy. But do you think that's like sharing of the security incidents should be regulated? should be enforced. What is a good thing and what's a bad thing about this? About forcing the company to share the data about the security incident. Okay, so the fact that we haven't seen any of such law this day mean that I think this is not something that the law can force the company to do, right? So yeah, and I think in this context, for this reason, they are considered as sensitive information, right? Sensitive internal information, and it should not be shared to the public. Okay, so the next topic is IT security baselining. What is baseline? I think baseline is related to benchmark, where the baseline is the first line of comparison, is the first initial set of measurement that you have performed and collected. So it is the measurement of the current practice and performance against established internal standard, right? Or the level of performance that has been set as a goal. It's a bit lengthy, but the baseline is a line in the graph that you are comparing against, right? That is all we need to understand. So you want to be better than the baseline, right? Now, if you compare against some competitor, or if you compare to the base standard, then the baseline is very high, and you want to approximate as close as possible. And and the reason why you use a baseline is to identify this gap. Right? The baseline is there to show you the relative performance between like what you are measuring and some initial or some standards. Okay, so an example here is an organization that want to measure the trends of the number of external attacks per week. Right? So there are two keywords here: the trend and the numbers of external attack per week. Right? So this is some of the number that you can collect directly, but some you need to compare it against something to review the trend. So the initial baseline in this example would be just run the first experiment and establish by counting the number of external attack per week over time, over some initial period of time, to determine an average observed weekly value. And you can use this as a baseline. And this baseline in this sense, in this example, means it's a reference for future measurements. This is initial baseline. Any question here? Any question or comments here for this example? Is it clear to you? The baseline in this example is the first experiment, the first set of data that you are collecting. Okay, cool. Yep. So once you have this baseline, what you do next is that you collect, you do the measurement. You do the continuous measurement to collect more data, right? And that would give you a second set of experiments, second set of data points, and then the last thing that you do is compare this data point against the initial baseline. And by comparing them, then you can see whether the number is increasing or decreasing. And this is how you review the trend, right? By itself, for example, the second set of result makes no sense. It's just a number. It exists in isolation, right? You can only see the trend by comparing it against the baseline. So yeah, so by collecting these two and plot them together, you can see the gap. And in this example, let me see. The bigger the gap in the negative sense, the better. So for example, after you deploy something, the number of external attacks per week drop sharply, and it means that that whatever you deploy is effective. Okay. Right. So this is a good example of baseline. Okay, so you can do baselining not only in this example, but you can do baseline in process, in people, and in technology. For example, you can baseline for people, do you perform background check on all the employees? Would the average employee recognize a issue or not? So this is like yes or no question, right? So the more yes question, the more yes answer to this question, the better. Okay, so you can just collect the baseline by having people answering this question and collect how many yes and how many no's that they have. And do that before and do that after you deploy some program, and then see how well the program is doing by comparing these two numbers. And you can do the same for processes and for technology. I think it's easier to do with technologies, right? This example is a typical example when the target is a technology like a firewall or a servers, firewall or some encryption system, for example, or antivirus system. Okay. Any questions or comments here at this point before we move on? Okay. Yeah, I think when it comes to data and measurement, I think we are all quite comfortable with this. Right. The next topic is measurements and measures and metrics. Right. So the data that we collect is called measures or data point, right? And we collect those data points or measures in order to determine the effectiveness of this overall security program. Okay. So the data point serve to demonstrate the effectiveness. And measurement is a process of generating these measures. Okay, so you cannot just like control this number out of the blue. You need to do proper measurement. You have to perform proper measurement process to get these numbers. Yeah, so measurement requires the design and ongoing use of a cybersecurity performance management based on effective performance metrics. Okay, so here is the confusion comes in. What is a measure versus what is metrics? Okay, so I just put it in the chat here. Measure versus metrics. Okay, so this is not a easy distinction between them, but I just post it as a question here as well to see if you have come across them in the past, and if you can share with us what you think are the main differences. What is the measures versus what is metrics? Are they the same thing? Yeah.
No, they're not.
What? Okay.
Measures are basically elements of the security system which are being implemented. So would be antivirus or protection. Metrics would be some parameters which we measure and can calculate how system perform by that.
Okay, so here's a confusion where the confusion comes in when I first read some of this document too. So Andres, the definition of measure mean control, right?
Yeah, security measures.
Control. Yeah. Security measure means security control. But when we talk about performance management, measures refer to the data point, to the data, to the value.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that sense, what is a value compared to the metrics?
Well, the metrics would be the parameter, basically what we want to achieve, and the value would be what we got.
Can you give an example, like a concrete example? So values, the type of the value and the
So
attribute you want to achieve.
say we'll be controlling data point. We want to see how many requests per minute goes there, and we know if it becomes too much, then this probably is DDoS attack, for example. So we can set a metric, say that we want this to be in a ballpark between that and that, and then if that goes above the line, basically we would raise an alert that something is happening.
I see. Yep. Okay. I think that is one good way to distinguish this term. Anyone else? Anyone else want to share their opinion? What is the measure and the metric? Yep, I think you can be forgiven in practice to use these two terms interchangeably. But according to the needs document that if you have time to read, this is a good document. Oh, no, not this one. I will show that to you later. There's a needs document that that define the differences between these terms, and the main difference here is that the metric is closer to the outcome, right? So in this example, okay, so instance of external attacks per week, this can be considered as a measure. It's just the value, concrete value. But the trend or the gap is considered as metrics, right? Because the gap, you can only derive it from this value, right? So you can, in that sense, you can think of the measure as the raw data, and the metrics as the representation of some sort of like data that has been analyzed. Yeah. So in our example, the measure is a number of attack per week, but the metric is a gap, for example. And so this metric is defined against some baseline as well. Does it make sense? Yeah. That's good. So we can move on. So this measurement, okay, you need a process behind it. And so we need to build a performance measure program as well. That's a specified step and the system in place to collect and to analyze the data. Yeah, so to achieve this, there's some framework that you can use to know how to guide you on how to structure that program, to structure that performance measurement program. And one example is a NIST program here that guide the development of performance measurement. And the key activities include, first is to identify and define the current state of the program, and developing and selecting the set of metrics that you want to implement. Okay. I think this is quite straightforward. The step is straightforward. And for this program to be successful, you need support. And what kind of support that you need? First one is leadership support, right? Because the leadership team is the one who give you the money to implement this. And you have security policy and procedure in place to guide you how to do measurement and how to report the result. And the important one, another important factor here is data-driven decision making, right? So it's be useless if the data that you collect and the analysis that you've done is not used at all. Yeah, so this means this require a sort of like systematic support of the entire organization, in the sense that the output of the measurement need to feedback to management, right? And use it to inform strategic decision. Okay, I think it's easy to see the impact of cybersecurity measurement, especially when you see the measurement reveal that you are really bad, right? So that would feedback to the leadership team, and they would act on it quite immediately. So what sort of measurement that you're collecting? So there are three types of information security measure that you can collect. The first three groups, not three types, three groups. The first group would be used to demonstrate, to determine the effectiveness of implementing or carrying out some policy. The second group of measurement that you can collect, or data that you can collect, is to help demonstrate the effectiveness and efficiency of the delivery of the service, right? So how well does it fit with the organization? Okay, does it prevent people from doing their jobs or not? And the third group is the impact of an incident, right? So this one is the most glaring one. I think this one can be easy to quantify, especially when the incident is quite bad, that you suffer from data breach, for example, or insider threat, or some vulnerability, that some zero-day vulnerability or ransomware. Then this one is the easiest to measure. Yeah, so these are the three groups, but then the different so many things that you can make and measure, so many metrics that you can measure. It means you have to pick a few, you have to prioritize the metric, and organization should prioritize in a way that align with the KPI, and to ensure focus on the area most important to them. And to prioritize, you do the ranking. And I think we all familiar with this from our risk assessment exercises, right? Remember, in the risk assessment, you would do you would list all the assets and prioritize them and see which one is most important. And you do the same for vulnerability and threats. Okay. All right. So the target is like the upper baseline that you want to aim at, right? And the target is important. You need to define the goals, right? And show how well you meet the goal. Without the goals, then it's not very meaningful either. So some measure aim for 100% target goal, but most of the time you can make do with relative measures, and it means like how close you are to the target goal. Remember, in cybersecurity, you cannot get 100% security, right? So I think you should never aim for 100% security in the system, but some of the relative or approximate measure, like how many incidents that you have avoided and how many incidents have been detected, is a good approximate for that target. All right, so this is a document that I'm referring to. This one is the NIST document, special document 800-55, where it discussed the performance measures in information system. And this in document, you can find the distinction between measure and metrics. And similar to other NIST document, it gives you some good guidelines on what step you need to do, what criteria that you need to meet. And some of the important criteria is that some metric have to be quantifiable, right? The best one is the one that you can put the numbers in. As we discussed earlier, quantitative data is much easier to interpret, right? There's no two-way about interpreting a number. So it's good to have a quantifiable metrics in place. And the second is data accessibility, right? So if you can measure, but you have nowhere to store them, then it's not very good, right? So data accessibility is about having a system in place for managing the data, for storing the data and querying the data. The third criteria is that repeatable process. So process has to be repeat. So this is relevant to the early discussion about consistency of the data, right? So if every time you run the same process, you have a completely different result for the same input, then the data, whatever is generated, is not consistent, right? So it's important here to make sure the system is repeatable. And the last criteria is that whatever you measure have to generate actionable insights. It cannot be something theoretical or not relevant to the organization, right? And ideally, it should be actionable. There's a small step between the insight extracted from the data and the step that you can take to fix a problem or to address a problem. All right, I think the last set of slides will be on metric, on some of the popular metric that we have. Okay, and here is a difference between metric and measure that we discussed just now. So in this sense, it's a metric mean detailed measurement, and measure refer to accurate high level results. It seemed to be quite different to the NIST documents, but I think they seem to be flipped. The definition, the distinction seem to be flipped. So there could be a mistake here in the slides. I think the ground truth of the distinction you should refer to these documents. And I believe in this document, the metrics refer to some high level results, whereas the measures mean like the raw data. Okay. And not all the metrics are born equal. So before identifying them and collecting them, you need to pause and think whether they're useful or not, because collecting a metric is not cheap. I mean, some metric come for free, but some you have to design, you have to write some piece of code, piece of software to collect them, and you have to spend money on disk to store them, right? So a few questions to answer before you start collecting the data. Why should this be collected? I mean, what specific statistic will be collected, how it will be collected, when and who will collect it, and what you can do with it, right? So these are some questions to ask yourself before you start diving in and collecting the results, collecting the data. So here are some examples by some quantitative metric that have been proposed for different areas of the company. For incident management, for example, you can collect things such as cost of incident, mean cost of incident, like mean incident recovery costs, thing like that. So you can see here they are metrics, right? They are not raw data. Because it's, for example, to compute the mean incident recovery cost, you have to aggregate them some way, right? So in this example, the definition of metrics means what we just discussed. For vulnerability management, there's different sets of metrics that people can use, like scanning coverage. It means how many machines have been scanned, and on each of this machine, whether the scanner has finished or not. And some of the results on the vulnerability scanning, like numbers of systems with no severe vulnerabilities, counting the number of severity per system, for example. Yeah. So there's a lot of different metric that you can use here. Depends on what you want to demonstrate. Okay, so this is vulnerability, and for patch management, you have similar metric as vulnerability, like how much has been covered, and whether the patch is comply with the policy or not. And the mean time to patch is mean how long does it take seeing the time that you identify the problem to the time that is completely patched. And the mean cost to patch, like how much manpower is needed to patch a particular problem. Security, some other security metric regards is related to configuration management. They are quantitative in the sense that they are numbers, right? Like the number of configuration, compliance, and the change management, like the mean time to complete a change. In application security, you have some numbers such as the number of applications in place running and the number of critical applications running, and application security testing coverage, like whether you have run pen tests of those applications or not. Yeah. The next set of examples is about qualitative metrics. Remember, qualitative is something that you cannot put the numbers on, right? And this qualitative results is to help with understanding of the perception, knowledge, and awareness security amongst employees. And you can use some metric like awareness and attitude. So the awareness is about how up to date they are with the current practice, current security standards. And attitude is like what they think about what the company is doing, right? Whether they agree with that policy or not, sort of whether they are supportive about the culture, or whether they supported about the program or not. And the final step is reporting the performance measure, is preparing, like gathering all the data, generating all the graph, and writing the report, right? For this one, what you want to show is the effect and to demonstrate the effectiveness of any of the program that you're employing. So you need to have careful consideration how you bring all of these metrics together to show the gap and to show the improvement, right? And the report that is written for the leadership team, it will be very different to the report that is written to the technical team. Okay, so you might have a different version of the same report. Okay, so I think here we come to the end, and today is really about the practice, the best practice. It's regarding like how to do benchmarking and how to do measurement, what metric that you want to obtain from the running system. And we learn a few concepts such as baselining, right? And the difference between metrics and measures, and the gold standard, and the due care and due diligence standard, the importance of benchmarking. Right. And I think that is about it for this week. I think the content is quite straightforward. I think especially for many of us here familiar with working with data, about the data collection process and data analysis process, and how to make sense of the data and how to report the results. Okay. So any questions here? Any question at this stage? Anything that you do not understand? Yep. Feel free to ask, feel free to unmute yourself or just type it in the chat. Okay, I think if not, then I think we can stop here. Hi, James. Yes, James. You are muted.
Yeah, hi. I didn't have a question about today's topic specifically. It's all fairly straightforward. Did a great job. It's primarily just about assessment 3. Is this an appropriate time to ask questions?
Sure.
Yeah, so I was reading through some of the documentation, and I was just looking into the slide deck The presentation. Is that there was a little bit of ambiguity in the documentation. Is that we're just creating a slide deck, for example, or is there going to be an actual meeting or recording required to?
Okay, so the slide deck is used for the presentation.
Yep.
Because you are assessed separately for the presentation from the report, right? So in the presentation, we expect you to present with the slide decks. So when you submit it, then it's best that you include the slide deck that you use for the presentation in it as well.
Okay, and so how do we schedule the presentation? Is that
so the presentation will
set
be
meetings or?
There's
the documentation mentions doing it with a member of the teaching team. I don't know if it's old documentation or whether it's just a recording we make.
Okay, so I have not checked it. I have not seen up on that detail with Jamal, but I ran this unit last time, and it seemed like you recorded with all the team members, and then submit the link to the recording.
Okay, because even the rubric, that's fine. That's great. That works for me. I'm happy with that. Again, some of the assessment rubric documentation is a bit confusing. I've seen some ambiguous.
Yeah.
I thought maybe I was misreading, but I brought it up. It does mention in one of the rubric areas. Again, I don't know if he's updated the document the last week, but anyway, so just record it, and as a group, record the presentation, and then submit that. Okay.
Submit that. Okay, so this is my interpretation of it at this stage, right? But if there's any update, if there's any clarification, then Jamal would announce it to the whole unit. But yeah, so this is my understanding about it at the moment. It has been the same for the last 2 runs of the unit, so I'm not sure whether it will stay the same. Okay, the chance is high that it will still be the same.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay, yeah.
Appreciate your help.
So King has a question whether the presentation will be group or individual. So you submit the presentation as a group. Yeah. So there's one presentation where we expect to see all the member in the group present. Okay. All right. So okay. So if there's nothing else, then we can stop here. Thanks everyone. I will see you guys next week. Have a good week. Bye.